We often tell ourselves this story. If you work hard enough, someday you'll move up. If you try long enough, life will change. Effort leads to reward. Discipline leads to success. But when we step away from motivation and look directly at global wealth, data, a colder reality appears. In some countries, this is no longer a question of effort. The outcome is already decided at birth. Today, we examine the top 10 countries, where the top 1% monopolize national wealth. This is not a story about who is richer. It is a story about who is structurally guaranteed to win. This ranking is not emotional. It is mathematical, and those numbers quietly reveal the true difficulty level of life inside each nation. Before we begin, we must clarify one thing. We are not talking about income. Salaries are noise. We are talking about wealth. Stocks, real estate, business ownership, financial assets, land and capital. The key question is simple: how much of a nation's total wealth is owned by its top 1%? The higher that number, the more extreme the inequality, and the more rigid the system becomes. Rank 10, Russia. On the surface, Russia looks powerful. A military superpower, a resource-rich nation. But beneath that image lies one of the most concentrated wealth structures on Earth. The top 1% in Russia control roughly 58% of all private wealth. This did not happen organically. After the collapse of the Soviet Union, state assets were rapidly privatized. Energy companies, mines, banks, telecommunications, all transferred at discounted prices to a tiny group of insiders. The oligarchs. These individuals are not merely wealthy. They are intertwined with political power itself. In Russia, wealth is not protected by markets. It is protected by proximity to authority. And for those born outside that circle, effort alone rarely opens the door. Rank 9, India. India is one of the fastest-growing economies in the world. Its tech sector produces global billionaires. Yet behind that growth, the top 1% control over 60% of the nation's wealth. The deeper issue is mobility. Education, healthcare, housing, and opportunity are largely inherited. The upper tier sends children abroad, builds global networks, and compounds advantages. The lower tier remains trapped in informal labor and financial instability. In India, birthplace and caste still matter more than talent. Rank 8, China. Officially socialist, practically hyper-capitalist in wealth distribution. China's top 1% control roughly 60% of private wealth. The core driver is real estate. Those who secured property in top-tier cities early gained an irreversible advantage. Property wealth converts directly into education, business capital, and political access. Behind the scenes, ties between state-owned enterprises, large corporations, and senior officials quietly reinforce this concentration. China's inequality is rarely discussed publicly, but structurally it is deeply entrenched. Rank 7, Brazil. Brazil has long struggled with inequality. Its top 1% hold about 63% of national wealth. Brazilian society is functionally divided. The wealthy live in gated communities, use private schools, private hospitals, private security. The poor rely on underfunded public systems while facing crime and instability. These parallel systems rarely intersect. Poverty here is not a temporary phase. It is a starting position. Rank 6, the United States, often called the land of opportunity. The data tells a different story. America's top 1% control approximately 67% of total wealth. Financial assets, stocks, and real estate are already concentrated at the top. Meanwhile, the middle class faces stagnant wages, rising debt, and soaring costs for education, healthcare, and housing. Failure is no longer a lesson. It is a permanent setback. In modern America, falling behind is increasingly irreversible. At this point, it is important to pause and ask a question. Many viewers may be thinking, what about Korea? Korea is rarely ranked among the most unequal nations globally, but that perception depends on which metric you choose. Korea's income inequality appears moderate. Its wealth inequality does not. Real estate concentration, particularly in Seoul and surrounding areas, has created a silent divide. Asset ownership determines access to elite education, marriage prospects, business opportunities, and long-term security. In Korea, effort still matters, but assets decide who can afford mistakes. Rank 5, South Africa. One of the most unequal countries in the world. The top 1% hold roughly 70% of total wealth. Apartheid officially ended decades ago, but its economic structure remains largely intact. Land, capital, and corporate ownership are still concentrated among a small elite. Education gaps, unemployment, and crime all stem from this foundation. In South Africa, birth matters more than effort. Rank 4, Mexico. Mexico's top 1% control around 72% of national wealth. The economy is dominated by a small number of powerful family conglomerates. Telecommunications, energy, finance, retail. Competition is restricted. New entrants are blocked. Wealth reproduces itself. Those without capital remain outside the system. Rank 3, Chile, often praised as Latin America's economic success story. Yet its top 1% control approximately 75% of total wealth. Privatized pensions, education, and healthcare favor those who already own assets. Even the middle class faces insecurity about retirement and medical costs. Chile's inequality is quiet, orderly, and deep. Rank 2, Argentina. Not Sweden, not Norway. Argentina's top 1% control nearly 80% of national wealth. Repeated economic crises and inflation have destroyed savings for ordinary citizens. Only those with access to foreign assets, real estate, or capital protection mechanisms survive each collapse intact. Crises arrive for everyone. Opportunity only arrives for a few. Rank 1, Colombia. The most extreme case. The top 1% control over 85% of the nation's wealth. Historic land concentration, the drug. Economy and political power have fused into a rigid elite structure. In Colombia, the wealthy design the legal system. The poor live inside it with no exit. Now we must ask the deeper question. Why do these countries share the same outcome? 4 structural patterns appear again and again. First, concentrated asset ownership. Second, privatized education and opportunity. Third, the fusion of wealth and political power. Fourth, crisis-driven wealth transfer. Economic crises are not accidents. They are recurring events. The difference lies in who benefits. The top 1% buy assets at discounts during downturns. Everyone else sells to survive. Over time, this mechanism compounds inequality at an exponential rate. This brings us back to Korea and to investors watching this video. Korea is not immune. High household debt, concentrated. Real estate and demographic decline create vulnerability. When the next downturn arrives, assets will not disappear. They will change hands. The question is not whether inequality will increase. The question is who will be positioned to acquire and who will be forced to liquidate. From an investor's perspective, this is the uncomfortable truth. The top 1% always win not because they are smarter, but because they own assets before crises begin. They survive volatility. They benefit from policy. They understand the rules. Effort is respected in this game, but structure decides the winner. The purpose of this video is not to create anger. It is to create clarity. Inequality is not a personal failure. It is a systemic outcome. And once you see the system clearly, the question changes. Not how do I work harder, but what game am I playing and where am I standing? Wealth is not built by effort alone, but understanding and positioning are available to everyone. If you are still watching, you are already ahead of most.